You know, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland is one of those poems that just defines the 20th century. For 100 years, we've thought we understood it, this broken, chaotic vision of a world just completely shattered by war. But what if I told you we've been missing a huge piece of the puzzle? What if the real ghost haunting this poem wasn't the trenches of the battlefield, but the quiet terror of the fever ward?
But before we dive into the poem, we have to start with a bigger mystery. Think about it. We build massive memorials for our wars. We tell stories of heroism. We remember dates we never forget. But pandemics, even the ones that are way deadlier, they just seem to fade away.
And I mean, just to put some scale on this, the 1918 Spanish flu is estimated to have killed up to 50 million people around the globe. That number is just staggering. It's way, way more than the number of soldiers who died in World War I, which is the event we always point to as the big trauma of that era.
So, why the difference? Well, war, for all its horror, gets framed as a collective sacrifice, right? It has a narrative. There are national memorials. There are stories of heroes. There's a cause people can rally behind. Pandemics are the complete opposite. The fight is personal. It's lonely. The grief is private. There are no grand stories of heroism, just quiet, tragic stories of helplessness happening behind closed doors. And all of that creates this cultural amnesia.
And this tendency to forget is exactly why the traditional reading of The Wasteland has been the only story for so long. So let's just quickly go over what we thought we knew. For a whole century, if you took an English class, you were told that the poem's fragmented, broken style was all about the trauma of World War I, about a culture falling apart, a crisis of faith, and yeah, Eliot's own messy personal life. And you know what? That's a really powerful way to read it. It makes a lot of sense.
But here's the kicker. Even Eliot himself kind of pushed back on these huge interpretations. He once just brushed the poem off as a personal complaint about life, nothing more. And that little comment, well, it cracks open a door for us to ask, what if there's another story here? Another trauma that's been hiding in plain sight all along?
And this is where things get really, really interesting. This is where the work of a scholar named Elizabeth Outka comes in. She's asking us to put on a totally new pair of glasses and reread the entire poem through a pandemic lens.
Just look at this timeline. The overlap is stunning. The war ends in November of 1918, but the Spanish flu is absolutely raging. And just 1 month later, T.S. Eliot and his wife, Vivian, both get sick with it. This intense personal illness is then immediately followed by a nervous breakdown and then the writing of his masterpiece. The timing is just too close to be a coincidence. And listen, this isn't just us guessing. We have the receipts, in his own words. In his letters, Eliot describes being sick with such vivid physical detail. He talks about a collapse, about a new kind of flu, and that unforgettable, extreme dryness and a bitter taste. He wasn't just writing about a sick culture, he was writing from inside a sick body.
Okay, so to really get where he's coming from, we need to know two key terms. The first is delirium. And anyone who's had a really high fever knows exactly what this feels like. Your mind just goes haywire. It's confusing, restless, you might even hallucinate. It's a total state of chaos.
The second word is innervation. This is that deep, deep exhaustion that comes after you've been really sick. You just feel completely drained of all energy, not just physically, but mentally, even spiritually. So, delirium and innervation. Remember those two words. They are the twin ghosts of the Spanish flu, and as we're about to see, they haunt every single line of this poem.
So now that we have the backstory, let's put on our detective hats. Let's actually go into the poem and look for the fingerprints the virus left behind.
Okay, our very first clue is the poem's structure. You know, for 100 years, people have wrestled with how chaotic and fragmented it is. But what if that confusion isn't a mistake? What if it's the entire point? What if it's a perfect artistic picture of a mind under attack?
I mean, just think about those famous opening lines. It's completely disorienting. April, the month of life and rebirth, is cruel. Memory and desire are all jumbled up painfully. That is not the thinking of a healthy, logical mind.
And that leads to this incredible realization. The poem's crazy jumps between different voices, different times, different places. It's not just about a culture falling apart. It is a perfect imitation of what's called delirium logic, that weird, associative, jumpy way of thinking that you have when your brain is literally cooking from a fever. The poem's form is a fever dream.
Okay, so from the mind, let's move to the body. While all the classic readings of the poem focus on spiritual suffering, the poem is shockingly physical. It is full of these raw, visceral descriptions of a body in real distress.
Take these lines, for example. We've all heard them. This desperate, maddening thirst, but there's no water, and a body that is just burning, burning, burning. For a century, we've read these as powerful metaphors for a spiritual drought, or, some destructive passion.
But what if they aren't just metaphors? What if they are also brutally literal? What if this is Eliot, the patient, writing down a record of that all-consuming thirst and that burning fever that were all too familiar to millions of people suffering from the flu? It's a record of the body's trauma.
All right, our final clue is all about sound. If you listen really closely to the world of the poem, you won't hear the sounds of war. There are no bombs, no gunfire. Instead, you hear something much closer to home, and honestly, way more haunting. You hear bells. The poem is filled with the sound of bells tolling from churches all over the city, marking the hours with what he calls a dead sound.
Now, this is not the sound of a distant battle. This is the sound of a city drowning in civilian death. It's the constant, unavoidable tolling of church bells for funeral after funeral after funeral, a sound that you couldn't escape. It was, in effect, the 1918 version of the ambulance sirens that became the soundtrack to our own pandemic.
Seeing Eliot's poem in this new light, it doesn't just change how we read a 100-year-old text. It actually forces us to turn around and look at our own recent past and ask some pretty tough questions.
After everything we all just went through with COVID-19, how is our story going to be told? What parts will we remember, and what parts are we going to quietly forget?
You can already see this battle for the story playing out. On one side, you have the official record, the sanitized statistics, the stories of heroes. And on the other side, you have the documented reality, the raw, unforgettable images from journalists and the millions of silent, private struggles that happen behind closed doors. And this is exactly why art is so vital. It acts as our collective counter-memory. Poems, books, photographs, they capture the messy, personal, human reality that the official histories often try to clean up, or simplify, or sometimes just erase altogether. In the end, The Wasteland works as this incredible monument to a forgotten pandemic, because it didn't just record the facts, it captured the feeling of the trauma. And that leaves us with one last big question. 100 years from now, when people want to understand what it truly felt like to live through our pandemic, where are they going to go to find our story?